IVM.
कृपया ध्यान दीजिए, the language used on the podcast may not be fit for consumption. We warn you, tread carefully. But listen, yaar, don't be so conservative. Namaste, India, and of course, Namaste, New York, because we're going to go right there and meet a superstar, a living legend, a man who, just to eat his food, you have to sell your family and flat. And that's a mark of respect. It's not that he's overpricing. It's also the difference between foreign exchange and us, dollars especially. Come to him in a minute. Chef Suvir doesn't need much of an introduction, but I've got plenty of things to say about him. Before that, I've discovered something beautiful I want to share with the people who watch this podcast. This is my gift as usual. Every week, I think I should give you something. I've discovered another way to keep yourself fit. I swim in my bed. That's right, land swimming. I've discovered this. You can do breaststroke, no double meaning, but you can actually do that. Or you can do backstroke, which is the easiest thing to do. Lie on your back and move your hands and legs and paddle properly. You can do it for 15-20 minutes. You don't have to wear a swimming costume. You don't have to wash up after that. You don't need any chlorine issue. You don't have a goggle issue and a breathing issue, sunbathing, getting sunburnt, etc., etc. Cold water, hot water, not an issue. So please try that. I can only do it when my wife's out of the room because she finds it offensive and infantile. But it's great and it's keeping me fit. And this is my gift, please. I've discovered it. I'll be patenting it. We'll discuss that offline later. But for now, go ahead and keep yourself fit by land swimming.
Feeling overwhelmed, anxious, struggling with too many obstacles, don't know where your life is headed? Well, if you are dealing with one or all of these, tune into the Positively Unlimited podcast, because in each episode, I share a life lesson, a life hack, a pro tip that can help you get your life back on track. All episodes are available on the IBM website, IBM Podcast app, or wherever it is that you get your podcast from.
And now, live from New York, ladies and gentlemen, on the podcast today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming one of the greats in the culinary world, who's also not just that, he's a public speaker, consultant, and a farm advocate. What does farm advocate mean? Nobody knows. We'll find out when we talk to him in a second. Suvir, welcome. I know it's really late past midnight in New York and we've kept you up. Firstly, I apologize for that. But that's the decision you made long ago to New York has caused all this. Otherwise, you'd have been in Delhi. And, with bad Wi-Fi, we'd have both managed this whole thing.
But that would have been torture, Cyrus. Thank you for having me. I'm a night owl. So at 12:30, my day begins. So thank you.
What the hell are you doing during lockdown at 12:30 in the night, sir?
It's my time. I write, I read, recite, I create mischief, I contemplate, I meditate.
Let's look at two of them. Recite and create mischief. What was that all about? What do you recite?
Songs. I'll write poetry. I'll compose some poetry into music, or I'll write a diary, or I'll just read a book, or meditate, or just binge eating. And I go to bed by 3:34 and I'm up by 7:38.
Wow. You have the exact same portfolio as our Prime Minister. Apparently he sleeps 3 to 4 hours himself. I don't know.
God, I don't know if I should take it as a compliment.
Well left, as we say in cricket. You let that ball go through to the keeper. Fair enough. So I didn't know that. So you're also a musician, an artist. I mean, obviously you are an artist. Being a famous chef, art is part of that, no doubt. But that's very interesting. So you do this professionally as well, or is this more like therapy for yourself, where you write, recite, sing?
It's for me. Cyrus, when I was 8 years old, I got my first paycheck from All India Radio for singing some songs for All India Radio through our school, modern school in Delhi.
Wow.
And so I sang a lot.
Modern school, there the rich people go, yeah?
I'm so poor, but we still got there. I don't know how.
Ho nahi sakta, bidu. Ho nahi sakta. And I'll tell you why. I had done a story in the 90s of the first set of mobile phones with kids, and it was modern school. Okay, that's the school that first had mobile phones. I was
one of the poorest in my class. And it wasn't a shabby thing, because I got to see all the fancy things that the world had for people, and yet lived a very average life. My father was a bureaucrat, and he'd gone to modern school. His parents had sent him there. So it was just another generation going. But yes, there were a lot of rich brats who were even arriving to school in their helicopter, landing on a field. So a lot of tamashas, but mine was a very average life, but rich life.
You catch the bus, I'll catch my helicopter. That would have been fun. Yeah. But let's not digress. So you said you were in AIR, you got a paycheck for singing? As a young kid?
172 rupees.
They still pay that. They still pay that same amount.
In the early 1980s. And when my father passed away 10 years ago, we opened his briefcase and that check was lying in a plastic sleeve. He'd kept it. He never cashed it. He'd given me the money. But he was so proud of that first paycheck.
Do you remember what you sang?
And
do you remember the song?
Yes, I think what the क्या हो गया? Oof, the hotel पे light चले गई.
बिजली तो आ जाते हैं ना दिल्ली में. What?
So I sang तुम राम कहो वे रहीम कहे दोनों की गरज अल्लाह से है तुम दीन कहो वे धर्म कहे मंशा तो उसी की राह से है क्यों लड़ा है कहे ये तेरी खाम ख्याली है पेड़ की जड़ तो एक वही हर मजहब एक एक डाली.
Wow, so I can take it that your political leanings with the opposition. That's for sure. Are we going to get your light back? At the moment you're in darkness.
I'm at a hotel and we've lost light. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No worries. It's also an audio show, so don't worry. Until we have Priyanka Chopra on, we don't have to worry about the visuals, as far as I'm concerned. So let's get right into it. Firstly, very proud to have you on the show. Honestly, your body of work is fantastic. Michelin chef, lots of books, public speaking. I don't know where to begin. And now I realize that you're an artist, almost like a sort of young Da Vinci who can sing, write, recite, and a prodigy at 8, etc., etc. So here's the first question. How come you didn't take up music and perhaps the acting and that kind of stuff? How did you then digress into cuisine and becoming a chef, a master chef?
So I wanted to be a doctor. But in addition to the 5 subjects every student takes, I was the first student in our school's history, modern school's history, that took 8 subjects in class 11th and 12th.
Wow.
I took physics, chemistry, biology, math, English. And in addition, I took music, Hindi, graphic design. So I took 3 extra subjects. And
sorry, but did you have any friends? That sounds ridiculous.
I didn't. I had no time for my classmates, and I didn't have time for teachers. Teachers forgave me for bunking their classes because I had to fit in 3 extra subjects in periods that didn't exist. And while doing that, I also taught macrame, a craft, to our school kids, class 6th through 9th. So I would also be taking 2 periods every week to teach others crafts. So school was very packed, very full, and my teachers took a risky bet on me and forgave me all the bunked classes and poorer grades in some subjects, but they knew I had a larger scheme to a plan to my life. And in retrospect, I think they gave me an education that money couldn't buy and dreams couldn't realize. So.
Wow, you're like my antithesis listening to all that. You're this overachiever who every single minute has been accounted for. And it's almost like your rest day is helping others, or your rest moments are when you have to help everybody else as well.
Helping myself.
Yeah.
Helping myself.
Wow. But again, so you were obviously an achiever. You were obviously good at a lot of different things and you have huge energy. So you could pursue all these things. And then let's get an idea of where suddenly you go towards the culinary arts. Because obviously you had many choices.
So, as I said, I wanted to be a doctor or a singer or an artist. The culinary arts were a constant in my life because we grew up in a home with a wonderful chef, Panditji, who cooked beautiful vegetarian khana of our family's heritage. We are Kayas from UP, so that was a food he cooked and recipes he'd gotten from my grandmother's side of the family. And Panditji made incredible meals that when I arrived in New York to study at School of Visual Arts at age 20, any restaurant I would go to, whether it was French or Italian or American, they didn't seem good enough because I was craving Panditji's food. And I would arrive home after a long day at school, a full-time job, and then I would cook every evening a meal for 8, 10, 12, 20, 40 people, all from my father's hard-earned money that was being sent to me for education. And I would cook a meal that people would eat, and then soon word spread that this young kid makes some of the best food in New York City. And people would bring their friends, superstars, celebrities, actors, supermodels, everyday people would just barge in with somebody they knew who knew me. And that would be an extra invite to dinner for them. And then that word would spread for a birthday party, call this kid. And I would do everything for free. Till one day, Elizabeth Bumiller, who had been the Washington Post head for the New Delhi, and her husband, Stephen Eisman, was the New York Times head for India. He was turning 50 and she came to me and she said, Subir, you need to cater this event. I said, I've never catered. I don't make money cooking food. She said, now you will. You'll do everything you do every day and just charge me because we'll have almost 100 people. I don't want you to do it for free. And that was the first job. And then one thing led to the other. My boss said, I used to work in retail, Henry Bendel, gave me 2 years severance and said, here's your 2 years salary. Go teach cooking, go start a cooking school, but do what you love. And if you still think you want to do retail, we love you, we'll have you back. And that's how I took the plunge to cooking. And it was a series of accidents, but mostly a craving for delicious, rich, beautiful Indian food that wasn't butter chicken, dal makhani, and paneer makhani, but was more nuanced than that.
No, so you were making your local sort of cuisine for all these, for the foreign palates, and they liked it.
Yeah.
And they were introduced.
They loved it.
They hadn't had it ever before, but they really got into it.
They never had it before. They didn't get into it. They celebrated it. For them, bharwa karela, zimikan ke kofte, nadru ki kachri. So these things that Indian kids won't eat, ghiya, loki, torai, they were like celebration of flavor that they never thought Indian food had that sophistication to have something light, something vegetable, something textured, something seasonal, something regional, something very delicate and light and mild. They thought it was all rich cream, butter, and lots of spices and overkill. So that's the mantra people think Indian food is all about. When I dispel that myth, that's when people realize that India had more to offer than meets the eye. And I think till the day we learn that our food, our home cooking, is the zenith of our cuisine, till then the world is not taking us seriously. We don't have a Michelin guide in India. They don't consider us worthy of having a Michelin guide. But if a cuisine is based on butter, fat, cream, and overindulgence of spices, nobody thinks of it as a sophisticated, layered, rich cuisine which has layers and layers of discovery for people to enjoy. Our ghar ka khana, whether it's the Parsi, the Gujarati, the Hyderabadi, or the Lucknowi, or the Madhya Pradeshi, or the Calcutta, or the Kashmiri, Assamese, wherever you go, the home food is so nuanced, sophisticated, subtle, refined, easy to digest, seasonal, that people are shocked that there's a cuisine in the world which is so in sync with what we call, in the world of global warming, we should be all living in a little more controlled manner where we are tuned to our surroundings. Indian food does that, and I hope more people will show that.
Wow, so you brought basically light to darkness. America needed a little more sophistication, and I always, having traveled the world a little bit, I must say, Suvir, I don't think anything can match Indian food in terms of sophistication, the layers, the masalas, the chutneys, just like you said, every little area has its own, it's very layered, our food. It's not just one thing, ever. And with due respect to the West, very often you find that not a lot of hard work goes into some of their cooking. It's, it's so basic that even someone like I can pick it up, while you do what my mom does in the kitchen. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that in 10 lifetimes in terms of all the different spices and turmeric and this and that. I mean, I don't even understand the things that are used. So, but it's amazing that they took to it, because most of my American friends growing up or foreign friends have great trouble eating Indian food beyond the 5 tested butter chicken, dosa, bosa, maybe bhel puri with less chutney, etc. But, to go into proper cuisines and give them proper absolute food from Uttar Pradesh, literally, which they probably would never experience when they just come to the big metros and eat the normal stuff. I think that's fantastic. You mentioned actors. So, any names, any big names that we would know who ate your food for the first time and said, who is this guy?
So, I think Richard Gere ate some, Uma Thurman had eaten them, Goldie Hawn, the people of all, Jake Gyllenhaal, Maggie, his sister, they've all eaten my food. I don't do this, almost kiss and tell, because that's the reason they come back to my restaurant. But
but this is our jingoistic moment through you, where we feel great that one of our homeboys goes there and all these big names that we've grown up on come running to your doorstep to eat your food. Sorry, go on.
But they came to a doorstep not to eat Suvir's food, but to appreciate that yes, Indian food doesn't have to be that greasy, burning, you say, the khatti dekar, the skin cells of that oily, pungent curry, that the Indian food can be as refined as the best of the world. So I must say that the Westerners haven't misunderstood our food. We misrepresented. that, the arsenal that we go use in our cooking, Cyrus, is an arsenal of spices that once you've collected them in a day or 2 or 3, they're now in your pantry. And you take one donga, and in that you create a wizardry that is impossible to recreate in any other cuisine. So if you go to French or Italian, there's first a mother sauce, a mother this, a mother that, and then you put them together, then a condiment, and you're bringing 100 different things from different places to come together in one dish. In Indian food, if you take a sabzi or a meat, you're guaranteed in one pot, it's this arsenal of spices that are then collected, and everything else is cooked right there fresh. And I think that when people see that, they realize, wow, this cuisine brought flavors, brought nuance, brought texture, brought taste, brought color, all by just adding in layers rather than adding different pre-made ingredients together to create a new dish. So our food is actually very refined.
So basically, we didn't have too many pots growing up. And so we had to do everything in one pot. So it's a necessity, mother of invention and all that. And so we cracked the system, learning on the job here from Chef Suvir. Before we got the Michelin star, so then you dropped the retail job. Of course, he did pay you a severance fee. I mean, that must have helped living in New York, most expensive city in the world. And then did you get formally trained? What happened next?
Yes, I got formally trained in the University of Fort Knox. The hard punches and on-the-job training. I never went to school to study cuisine. But I would stay up from my dinner parties would end around 12:30, 1:30 in the morning. From 1:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the morning, I would pick up The Art of French Cooking by Julia Child or any of the other books that were classics. And I would cook a dish or two from them every night. And then I would take them to my friends who knew a good French style cooking. And I would ask them, what do you think? And they would literally rip them apart or celebrate my big successes. And in doing that, over a course of 2 or 3 years, I'd cooked any and every dish that you could have imagined. Student in a culinary school to have looked at, perhaps not cooked, I had made in my own kitchen. And that was an education that I think was even better than a school education, a rigorous education at an institute. It's interesting that today I'm the chairman of the Asian Studies Center, the Culinary Institute of America, the world's largest, greatest culinary academy. And I love watching kids go through school. But I think there's something to be said that it is important to get great education, but any student of any trade, of any profession, should have a lifelong hunger to learn, grow, and to experiment and play. And I think I would tell students who've gone to a great school to keep being students every day that they live.
But that's a very poignant question, actually. You talk about Panditji from your past. I'm sure he didn't get schooled in any way. Literally learned on the job, whether it was your family members who taught him or whatever. And that's the story of many households across India. Let's face it.
Absolutely.
Right. And but yet he can hold his own, because through his vision or whatever, you became a chef in a sense, and and that was spread all over as well once you went to America. Yeah.
Panditji ki jo haath ki safai hai. He came in my grandmother's trousseau with an elder brother and another person. And Panditji had been trained by my dadi's mother, and all the recipes of the family. And kadhi chawal, he would, the kadhi, even today, I can't copy it, but he would take a donga and put it sideways and aise haath usme hawa marte the. It's like a machine paddle coming in. Now, sivai tircha karke Panditji, he says, hawa aur bhi achhi jati hai. His pakoras melt in your mouth. I make great pakoras. They can rival the best I've had, but they can't match Panditji's. So in every little recipe that he made, he had this trick that he had learned through my great-grandmother and through my grandmother and his and my mom's experiences. And those were, he happily shared. I have a book that I kept of all his recipes. So I know those tricks. Am I going to do all of that he did? Take 20 minutes to beat air into a curry. Hum log paas machine hoti hai. But when machine does it, the texture of the besan is changed because we have to smoothen it out enough that the machine can move. But Panditji doing it with his hand, breaking his shoulder bone for our pleasure, aerated without too much liquid. And that created a pakodi that was better than any other. So I think home cooks and people who chase a profession out of passion, what they bring to that equation is unrivaled by any formal education, because one is a thirst that is so viscerally relevant to that person that they chase it like nothing else. And that success that they see after that cannot be matched by anybody else. I think that's the truth of life. Some of the greatest chefs, artists, they've all never been schooled, but they took paint and color, or they took a knife and food and started creating and persevering and failing and going back to work. And that equation of failing and going back to work and walking again after falling, that creates these masters that they know inside out what not to repeat in a kitchen. Students at the Culinary Academy learn what to do, but they haven't been taught how to deal with failures of life that come every day, no matter whether you're educated or not. And these self-taught people have to learn those failures very quickly, and they have to deal with them every day.
So we could save a lot of money instead of sending the kids to culinary school somewhere in Michigan or whatever, if we could just meet Panditji, or, the various Panditjis of India.
Cyrus, you're raising a very good question. I have a hard time because, I teach at the Culinary Institute of America. I present there. I work so closely with the team there. I think there's a smart parent would do both. They would send their child to a culinary academy or institute to get the formal diploma, degree, stamp. But then I think the most important education a chef or an artist of any ilk can get is by going out there and working. I think simultaneously, as soon as their education is over, a year, if you're lucky, if you're blessed by having that bank account that you can support your children for a year, you should send them to travel to these places that the child might love, if it's Japan or India or wherever in the world that the kid loves the food of, and to go send them for 3 months charges between 4 chefs they figure out in those nations, and work with 4 chefs for free, pay their rent, and then be supplicants to that master and say, teach me what you do. And that education, in addition to what the Culinary Institute teaches, would...
Chef, my God. The third world country of the United States of America scared. Oh, you're there. For a second, we seem to have lost your network. I've been talking to Biden on the phone while this was going on, and America has to come to the party and try to be like us, Wi-Fi sufficient everywhere. Sorry, we were interrupting your flow. So you said, yeah.
No, you're right. It's a first world nation with, my father used to call America fourth world. And I said, what do you mean, Papa? He said the third world knows that what its problems are and it's fixing it. America as a first world nation is a fourth world nation because it denies its problems. And by denying it, it's not fixing them. So we have a lot broken here. And I'm very happy that I'm in the nation of my soul, my birth, India these days, and learning that how lucky we are for so many things. And yes, we still are teenagers, so we need to learn a lot more. But India has much going for it.
It's like a parallel to your own journey in your career, where you have the best of both worlds. So you sort of work there, but your heart is Desi, and you were schooled basically by India, and then of course finished off, if you can use that term, in the US to where you are. So you have that distinction of having both. We'll run out of time if we don't get into 2-3 things. I need to ask you, what is a farm advocate? I presume you're supporting farm products.
So Cyrus, till a year ago, I was the proud owner of American Masala Farm, an 80-acre farm in upstate New York, in a town called Hebron, which is the valley between...
Suvir, can I have my relatives come and stay there when they don't have a place?
Yes.
80 acres is like half of Mumbai. Oh, that's great. Cheers. Plus your food. I mean, wow. 5-star hotel.
Yeah. I said till a year ago, so it's now sold.
Oh, damn it. As usual. Fourth world country.
I moved to India, stock and barrel, divesting of everything I had in America. I became Desi from birth, Desi at heart, and Desi in all that I have.
Rebirth.
Yeah. Desi by rebirth. Actually, that is true.
Yeah.
And so the farm, we had 300 mouths that we fed, all organic, all natural, all ethically raised, humanely treated. And it was a very difficult journey to think of an Indian man. I was young. I was in my mid-30s, having this dream that people thought was a pipe dream, organic, natural, all these. It came at a very big expense that made me travel 25 days a month to earn money to keep those animals well fed. But it was a dream come true. We had alpacas, we had llamas, we had goats, we had chickens, we had sheep, we had ducks, geese, we had peacocks, we had dogs, we had wild animals, mountain lions, a family of 5. We had coyotes, we had
Wow.
snapping turtles, and we had a partridge in a pear tree. So,
So Noah's Ark, basically.
Noah's Ark. But
with Indian cuisine.
With Indian cuisine. And what I learned over there, the reason Farm Advocate, I learned very quickly that being a farmer, being a sensible farmer, has been made impossible in this world. In India, the organic label is all baloney. You're living you're farming in geographies that are far from organic, but you've just created a label and an entity that says I'm organic, but the water body underneath is all inorganic. The sprays, people spraying chemicals all around you are inorganic, but you think, oh, the bee that's jumping from an inorganic fertilizer-ridden flower to your fruit tree is not bringing those inorganic chemicals. So there's nobody policing the organic label in India. Yet there are all kinds of businesses from big to small making loads of money with that stamp, and Indians are foolishly buying it. In America, the label is crippling, that if you go for the organic label, there's so much money that you have to invest in getting that label for yourself, that by the time a farmer does that, they're bankrupt. So I think for me, it was all about doing correct farming to teach people that go drive to us, see what this farm is all about. Organic, natural, doesn't matter. See if the animals are being treated correctly. Are chickens laying up of each other with poop between them? Or are they flying free, cage free, and seeing sunlight and sleeping under the moonlit sky happily? So if you see good behavior rewarded by your business, if labels don't mean anything.
But how would you feed mountain lions? I don't understand that. I mean, they're wild, right?
We didn't feed them. The mountain lions are wild, and we could have been fodder for them.
Thank God.
We could have been fodder for them.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right. But one more quick thing. This Michelin star, please understand that we don't know this world at all. Hence, we're asking infantile questions. How does one actually get a Michelin star? And why is it that we don't have? You just mentioned Indian cuisine, arguably with Chinese cuisine, maybe the most sophisticated in the world, and yet we don't seem to have as many Michelin star achievers, or that stamp is not given to us. So, without sounding like a racist, what would be the reason?
I think the guide doesn't go to every country. They see if a city or a country has respected its own cuisine, if it's invested in its own foodways, if it has matured as a food tradition, then they realize that, okay, it's worth it to have a guidebook. The guidebooks, it wasn't about giving stars to human beings. It was about bringing a guide that told you where you could get refined, wonderful, delicious meals that were consistent, that were curated through the eyes of a group of people that thought alike and had standards that they would maintain through their judging. So in India, like in many other nations where the guide hasn't gone, we don't care if you're putting dalda or if you're putting palm oil or if you're putting kerosene, because we think jo sasta hai chalega, and customer usme tum masala dal do, usme tum thoda sa badboo dal do, to sab kuch khatam. Nobody will know what they're eating. But that integrity isn't there. In Japan has more Michelin stars than any other part of the world, and here it's an Asian nation. For them, integrity and honesty and preservation of culture is so important that there the guide bows and says, you are the gurus of all gurus for the Michelin Guide. So I think as a nation, when we become more honest about who we are, about promoting ourselves, but also preserving the best of our culture. We're not making shortcuts, making sure that dalda is not in our foodways. Whether it's street food or fine dining at a 5-star hotel, there's no dalda in the kitchen. When we police ingredients that judiciously, when we have our health and our wellness ahead of money and profiteering, at that point, the guidebook will see a nation that's matured and cares about its own life and wellness, and that's when the guidebook will come to it.
We've gone from being proud of our Indian roots and all the culture and sophistication of our cuisine to the fact that we are morally bankrupt and hence can't climb the Michelin star ladder. But can we bribe them, Suvir? Is there a way to?
Can bribe them?
Can you bribe them?
I actually think the Michelin Guide is outdated. I think this is the era of the Asian tigers. Even if we are a lazy one or a less loud, robust one, I think we need to have a Cyrus Guide. And I'd love to be the editor-in-chief of the Cyrus Guide. And why not? Why should we have a French guy telling us how to eat?
It's almost like opera or, Hindustani classical. It's almost like you push the audience away sometimes by saying that, it's Michelin. Well, I would think that, you go back to Delhi and you go to one of your favorite restaurants, Colonel Kebabs or whatever, and because there's a crowd outside, that's why it's working. I mean, isn't that the proof in the pudding?
Absolutely.
Or whatever the line is?
And I think, Cyrus, that's what we need to do. We need to have a guidebook for the world that brings the Asian perspective, that brings the Indian perspective. Why should we have to dance to the tunes of Northern Europeans who were colonizers? Our minds are colonized by the colonizers' mindscape, that they've left, but we are perpetuating their horrors by buying into their bullshit. And that it's time we create our own.
So I take it you're not supporting France in the Euro Cup, whatever happens. That's clear.
I love France, but I think
they love you.
I think the French are not the issue. It's us Indians that are subservient to the French and allowing them to be stupid. The French don't want the Michelin guide to succeed over India. But there was a Pakistani driver, a taxi driver in New York that once said to me, साहब हम देसी लोग गोरे की लाल गाल देख के अपनी थप्पड़ मार मार के लाल करते हैं. We just want to. So I think
the greatest poets are taxi drivers. It's very clear.
Absolutely.
I do believe that. Yeah, everybody's in the wrong profession except you, sir. We'll take a quick break. We want to talk about the books as well, and we'll bring Silvery, Antariksh in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred and Sia. Thank you so much for making this possible. We've had an amazing week on the network. Do check out The Note with Mahrukh Inayat. She speaks to Prabhat Kumar, the man leading child protection at one of India's leading NGOs, Save the Children. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Rajat Mittal Shah to talk about some superfoods in Ayurveda like turmeric and ashwagandha. On Paisa Vaisa, host Anupam Gupta has a digital gold special in two parts, one with Ashraf Rizvi, founder and CEO of Digital Swiss Code, and Gilded, and one with Deepak Abbott, co-founder of India Gold. Listen to the first part of the Father's Day special of Agla Station Adulthood with Natasha and her father, Dr. Vipul Roy Rathod. You should also check out Cyrus Says' episode with Mukul Chadda. He talks about upcoming shows Sunflower and Sherni. Our Kannada podcast, Thale Artist, celebrates 100 episodes, and we had a reunion of hosts Pawan, Ganesh, and Surya who shared their favorite moments from the past. Shiva Mehta is back with the second season of Smile India. The show is available in both English and Hindi. On this episode, she talks about the conversion from bag teas to bagless ones and how we should ditch the plastic and have a great tea experience. And with that, let me get you back to your show.
Follow me at Instagram and Twitter on Bored Brocha. I'm so bored, I need your help. I need your love. I need your touch. Okay, just follow me. Silvery, come on. By the way, and this is not a joke, Suvir, he actually learned cooking in the lockdown. So he's a young man living in Mumbai. And it's one of the good things that a lot of males in our middle-class urban phenomena of India who would shun the kitchen or actually have no knowledge have, discovered themselves in the lockdown. Silvery, you want to tell Chef how you make the best?
I mean,
Silvery's name is Antariksh Silvery.
Yes.
Oh, pet name is Silvery.
Yeah, my nickname on this show is Silvery. Anyway, I did learn a little bit in the lockdown, but I feel weird talking about my accomplishment in front of you, of course.
No one's asking you to compare yourself with Suvir Saran. That's not the point. Yeah. The point is that, just the fact that a lot more people are interested in cooking. Yeah. Go on, Silvery.
For the first time in my life, I learned how to make a pizza from scratch with the base and the sauce and everything. And I learned in my own, even if I do say so myself, it came out pretty well multiple times. I've been doing it for the last several months now. And I made galauti kebabs, mutton galauti kebabs, which was, I was again very proud of.
Amazing.
So like small things like shahi paneer.
How did you make the galauti? How did you make your galauti kebab?
With the papaya that you have to use, the papaya extract or the sliver of papaya just for the softness, for the meat to
tenderize,
basically become really soft and tenderize the meat. Yes, and then all the masalas that are needed. That I don't remember the masalas by heart right now, but yes, it came off quite well. Yes, it was really soft and just.
Did you follow Chef Suvir's guidelines from one of his books, or did you do your own thing?
No, I did not. But now I will. Yes, next time I cook, I will.
But who did the dishes, Antariksh? Who cleaned up after you?
Who cleaned the dishes?
I did because Because it was the initial parts of the lockdown and our house help wasn't allowed to enter the building.
Wonderful. I think that's the key to good cooking, is to keep cleaning as you go. And that makes the joy of cooking much greater at the end, because you have nothing to clean. You're serving great food and everything is clean already.
But chef, we are exposed to all these people on television shows where the chef is like this great god who comes, like a Salman Khan of cooking or something, and just does the final, every the cutting of onions and the tomato and all that is done by other people, and he just comes and barks orders basically and just probably puts some flavor into the big pan. So is that really true that these alpha males who come, and you don't appear to be that type of bullying personality, but that's the kind of idea we get from many of these chefs that we see, or is it just all television?
No, there are chefs like that, but there's very little real in reality TV. Like most reality shows, they're scripted to the nth degree. There's little natural happening over there. But in the kitchen, you have diva chefs who are obnoxious because they are just unsecure human beings and unhappy souls. Or you have kitchens where you have amazing chefs who work as if they are poetry in motion. So I think you have all kinds of people that make all kinds of kitchens. The old school kitchens were very highly adrenaline rushed kitchens that were abuse and anger and nastiness rule supreme. In today's kitchens across the world, I think good behavior, treating one another like equals, and cajoling people into working without being insulting. That's the mantra, and I think we are doing it in India. We are doing it overseas. So these reality shows give people entertainment. Sad people think obnoxious behavior is entertaining. I think differently. But yes, reality TV perpetuates the most horrible things that we would never let happen anywhere else in reality TV.
But Suvi, that gives a lot of Indian males hope, those stereotype personalities, because then we think we can also do it. इसमें क्या है? Last 2 minutes में आ जाओ, pan के सामने आ जाओ और टक 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 करके, and then you walk off with the glory.
And करते हैं, and unfortunately, a lot of men, not just Indian, when dad or dadaji or nanaji achar बनाते, तो poor nani, dadi, wife did all the work, and then he came and mixed it all together.
I love that word.
Unfortunately, a lot of men who take credit for this crap, but I'm very proud of Antariksh for having cooked and cleaned at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think he surprised himself also. We used to joke about it because we were all bored sitting at home and having conversations like this. But I think he surprised himself that he was actually relatively good at it. Like you just said, the answer to that is not the Michelin star, but the people who eat it. And his family members and whoever was around immediately, they're not going to lie. They're not going to eat, except his mom. No one is going to eat the food and say, beta, well done. Right,
yeah.
Sylvie?
Absolutely, yeah, correct.
If you don't like it, you don't like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Antariksh, how did you make your pizza?
I kneaded the dough as required and then made the sauce with fresh tomatoes and just a little bit of garlic in the pizza sauce.
Now you're sounding like you're teaching Suvir Saran how to make a pizza.
No, of course not.
And then I put this. Suvir sir, please note down properly. Yeah.
Then I also made some garlic butter to be applied on the base a little bit because I like garlic a lot. Then with Parmesan, I tried pepperoni also on it. I tried regular chicken salami because whatever meats I had at home. I also tried a paneer variant, but yeah, it was.
But you did this?
I did it in a tandoor oven. We have a tandoor oven at home. We made it in a tandoor oven.
You made it in a tandoor oven?
We have like electric tandoor ovens.
It's an indoor oven.
The box one.
The box ones. Yeah, sorry, not the main. No, not the where you put the hand inside. No.
Suvir sir, we don't have 90 acres of farm, yaar. छोटे-छोटे घर में रहते हैं लोग. जगह भी नहीं है. Nobody has an oven also.
मेरा दिल्ली का घर देख लीजिए तो आपको पता चल जाएगा. I live in a flat with very little जगह.
Sir, Michelin star doesn't have a flat. What hope is there of my young gentleman in Powai who's just mastered the pizza? He's got a long way to go.
But what you didn't tell me is how the dough was made. That's the important thing.
Yes. The little bit of yeast, less than 7 grams. I think that's the most, if I'm not wrong. A little bit of yeast, warm-ish water, like room temperature water, so the yeast gets activated. Lukewarm water, yes, so that it activates properly. Then you mix it in with the dough. And let it rest. Like whatever you need the dough, let it rest so the dough rises, and give it as much time as you can. If you have a few hours, give it a few hours. If you haven't, or if you can let it rest overnight, and the next day you can then prepare your base and as it goes.
So next time you make it, Antariksh, in the flour, add a little bit of dried herbs.
Dried herbs.
Oregano, rosemary, thyme. crush करके उनको आप डालना.
Okay.
And you can also add a little freshly ground black pepper.
Okay.
And a couple of tablespoons of olive oil, and see the difference it makes to your dough.
Okay, yes.
These are tricks that chefs hold up their sleeves and never talk about.
Okay.
So the dough has flavor all of a sudden, and it makes it delicious. So now your pizza will have even a sassier personality.
Thank you so much. This is great. Yes, I will definitely do this.
Say thank you to me. Say thank you to me.
Oh, thanks.
Guru Govind dono khade kaise lagu paaye.
Correct.
Say thank you to me. I have shown you the way. Okay, by getting him on this would be a charge for a normal student in a culinary school of thousands of dollars to get this information from him, and we've got it for free. So show respect to your seniors, beta. Listen, Suvir, we want to quickly get into the books and then we'll do the AMAs because we have a time-bound thing here. Let's talk about, so Indian Home, the first book was Indian Home Cooking, is it?
Yes. So Indian Home Cooking was, I was in my 20s when a journalist, a publisher came to me and said, why don't you write a book? And they gave a dollar sum to me that to my little pigeon brain didn't seem right. She said, we'll buy it for $25,000, $30,000. And I said, what? And I knew there would be a lot of work going into my book. So I kept creating a diary, kept testing recipes. This was 25 when she offered me $25,000, $30,000. When I was turning 30, I found the greatest agent for chefs took me on, Angela Miller. And then the first time she took me to a trade show called the IACP Awards, I was put in front of Pam Krause, who was the editor-in-chief of Clarkson Potter Random House, the best cookbook publisher of the planet. And Pam said to me, I want to buy your book, even before we had left that dinner party. And Angela was digging her heels into my toes, that don't open your mouth. So I said to her, what did you do? Pam was wanting to buy a book. She said, we have to show her a proposal. And once she sees a proposal and the scope of work of it, she may give $100,000. But if I just tell her buy the book without anything seen, she may put a number that I can never take her up to 100,000. So we took a good 1 week to write the proposal after we came back from the awards. Pam read it and she said that you're the bridge that has to be gulfed between India that shall be in the 21st century and India that has been in the 20th century. She said your writing translates Indian food, demystifies it, and it will change how cookbooks are published, Indian or non-Indian, in America. Because each recipe came with a story about the provenance of the recipe or what mood brought it forth and what trick there may be in the recipe that people can learn from. And after my book came out, almost now it's been 15 years, every cookbook published in America, most publishers now want a little essay with each recipe to tell people about that recipe. So, of course, Pam gave us a big chunk of money, the largest once given to an ethnic cookbook writer. And the book went to sell over 250,000 copies. Most cookbooks sell 8,000 to 10,000 copies, and that's a good run. So I've sold 250,000 and it's still selling. And
wow.
So Indian Home Cooking was the first book, and it's the cookbook that Indians give to their children and their bahus and damads and betas and betis when they're going to college or getting married. And a lot of non-Indians buy because it just demystifies Indian home cooking. It's the recipes of our Indian homes, from dal chawal to karela to lotus stem to all the achars and halwas and things that are ghar ka khana. That's what it like the name, it promotes just Indian home cooking.
Also, we learned that Angela Miller is a Marwari name. I didn't know that. I'm growing up. Now we know that that's also a name in the community. So you found the right, what is it, the right manager or the right second half to help push your talent forward.
Yeah.
Does she still work with you?
It's very important.
Does she still work with you?
She still represents me, and Angela, she has remained the most powerful literary agent for food publishing in America.
All right, let's go to the second one, which is a fresh introduction to Indian food, American Masala, together.
So American Masala came after this, and in American Masala, I wanted to share with America my American table, which was proudly Indian, was proudly not Indian, and was proudly borrowing from other parts of the American mosaic, which happened to be different regions of the world. And it was food that I cooked with an Indian inflection, Indian mindset. We Indians are greedy for flavor. We Indians love the textures, colors. We love boldness. We love a variety of condiments, So in American masala, whether it was pasta you were eating or a fried chicken or a pavlova as a dessert, there was each bite brought to you this saturation of flavors that also came with textural contrast, color contrast. It was feast for the eyes, food for the mind, body, and soul. And perhaps if I have to pick a favorite out of my 3 cookbooks, one that I'm still very close to, and it was a labor of love, and it was a personal recipe book because these were recipes that we made almost weekly in our home, and it's a beautiful book.
All right. The third one, which is New Classics from My Home Kitchen and Masala Farm.
So Masala Farm was a novella, part biography, part cookbook, and a small book with the size of a novel, but it was the 3 nominees for the best American cookbook. We were shocked, the country was shocked that a little book like that could be, when people write 1,000 recipes and here were 75 recipes, and it was nominated for the best American cookbook. And it's the pages, each page is beautifully designed. The stories are all about our farm, including a story about our chicken eggs, which we had 36 varieties of chickens. All the experts, avian experts, told us that we'd have a bloodbath at our farm because more than a couple of breeds of chicken, then there's bloodbath. I had 36. I had 8 to 10 roosters at all times. With the girls, nobody killed each other. It's what we teach humans is what we end up making them out to be. If you teach humans, barbaric behavior, they become terrorists. If you teach humans from birth to be civilized and decent and kind and civil members of society, they become that. So these chickens had known no better. They thought they were siblings and of all shapes and sizes. Their eggs were a rainbow of colors and the yolks were deeply golden. So people would come and buy our chicken eggs and we would sell them at $6 a dozen. And with the farm at the supermarket, you can buy them for $1 or $1.50 for a dozen. So one day a man, a local resident from around the area came and he asked my partner, Charlie, he said, how much are the eggs for? He said, heritage eggs. What are heritage eggs? He said, these are all endangered breed chickens. Some of them are extinct and we are bringing them back to the fold. Others are in the watch list or critically endangered list. It makes them heritage chickens and their eggs are very special. They lay an egg every 3, 4, 5, 8 days, not every day. So the laying of the cost of those eggs is very high. The cost to us would be $7, $5. That's the math. We would, at a loss, we would sell them at $5 because we were already charging more. So this man said, how much for these eggs? And my partner said, $5. He said, what's so special about them? He said, well, take them home, eat them, and you'll tell us. And he said, well, I can't take them. Charlie gave it to him for free. He said, I can't take this for free. He gave Charlie a joint. And he said, this is from me, from my homegrown marijuana. He gave Charlie a joint to say thank you for the eggs. So, it has stories like that about how we had a snapping turtle that ate 50 ducks and geese that we had just put into the pond. Every morning we would wake up and there'd be one half-eaten animal floating in the pond. And we were like, what is this? And then we realized there was a snapping turtle, a curmudgeon that was biting eating the bottom parts of their bodies while they were swimming. So then that had to be shot with a rifle and to protect our birds. So there's a cookbook and a memoir both, and it's food of the countryside, farm to table, and it's a beautiful book. It's very well designed, chronicle books, published it. They had been they'd been taking me out on dates ever since the first book was published. $250 million for any books for any publisher to see as sales is an incredible feat. So they wanted me to switch from Random House to them, and I did. And they did a beautiful book.
Wow. And so, Silvery, have you understood the message in this story as well?
Kill turtles if needed.
Oh, no, I don't think. No, that's not the story. The story is, before Bitcoin, we had marijuana as a currency. And unfortunately, we've jumped. We've jumped too fast.
Cash crop.
Yeah, it's allowed in many states in America, is it not? So you guys are good. All right, there's also, before AMA time, Instamatic, to keep up with today's world, I suppose, quick and fast. So you come up with Instamatic, a chef's deeper, more thoughtful look into today's Insta world, but with food as the...
Instamatic, Cyrus, I came to India after suffering a mini stroke in America.
Oh.
And after realizing that perhaps I may be on this earth just for a few weeks, a couple of months, I survived. My mother and my partner, Charlie, brought me to India. I kept getting better rather than what doctors had predicted. I may not make it. I made it. But the journey was 18 months of torture, in which 11 months I was legally blind. I could see nothing from one eye, left eye, right eye, I could see 3 feet. And Instamatic was my way of taking the iPhone. And I was always looking at the world through the iPhone because the iPhone brought it closer to me. So I could see what was where I was. And so I would click photographs of the distance and then look at them close up, and I would realize I'm still connected to a planet of people, of thought, of movement, of action, of disparity, of treachery, all of that. And I would then, looking at those photographs, I would write essays of how I felt when my brain was pretty much dead. I'd lost memory. I had sounds in my brains that from 7 concussions that I'd had. It wasn't I didn't want to live with not being able to see, with sounds that made you. I felt like a blender in my head. That all given times, awake or asleep, there was a blender running in my head, and that noise would drive me nuts. But to make peace with my life and to carry on, these photographs and these essays gave me distraction even while my brain was being blended by the sound in my head. And that's 100 photographs and essays on life and living through a legally blind man's camera of connecting it to the world.
Okay, insensitive and stupid question, but now everything is okay?
Yes. Is everything ever okay? I don't know. But every day brings a new challenge. But memory is back and sight is back. I've had cataract after sight came back, and now I'm again thinking there's something going wrong with my sight. But every day is a blessing, Cyrus. And I realized what people have gone through the lockdown. I went through 18 months of my brain being locked down. I had people who would look at me with siblings, my mother or friends, and they would say to each other, forget about him, he's done with. Because I could not react. I could hear people, I could see their expression, but my brain wasn't functioning enough to be able to react to them and tell them, hello, I'm right here, I'm not gone. But for me, it's now even more important for us as human beings to realize that those people who are differently abled, who've lost some skills due to trauma, who are born that way, we can't treat them like they're just inanimate objects. They have feelings. They may be hearing us like we think they're not. I heard everything, good and horrible. I remember the faces of friends who said unkind things to me because they thought I'd never be alive to challenge them on what they said. And so, it's very interesting that the brain is a fascinating part of our organ of the body that we know nothing about. And 7 concussions and brain injuries later that healed over 18 months. It's a miracle. They said it could have taken 3 years, 4 years. It happened in 18 months. And I got pretty much everything back. I've gained weight. I've become a mota hathi and I'm living. But I can't be more grateful to life. That's
a small price to pay. So if you had 7 concussions and you're back to normal, but with a little excess weight, I'm sure that's acceptable.
It is. Yeah. I think it's very acceptable. I'm a lucky man. There are still people who are blind who won't get their sight back. There are people who can't talk, who will never get their voice back. I got my voice back. I got my sight back. I got my hearing back. I got my sense of smell back. And I got my ability to talk and communicate back. I'm a lucky one. Nothing.
This never happens to politicians, though. I never read about them suffering these 7 concussions and not being able to hear, speak, talk, think. That doesn't seem to happen.
It's perpetual and they don't hear.
That's true. That's from childhood. You're right. All right.
पेश खिदमत है आपकी शान में हमारे अंजुमन से. Hi, I am Sadaf.
And I'm Arshit. खाने का इतिहास, economics, policy, psychology, सब है मेन्यू पे.
Only on the Nankali podcast every Wednesday, सिर्फ IVM podcast app या वेबसाइट पर या फिर जहां से भी आप अपने podcast सुनते हो.
Listen, let's go into the AMAs because we'll have to wrap this up. Been lovely talking to you, but now these AMAs will probably be about chef, maybe be about something else as well.
Yeah.
Silvery?
Yes, sure. Let's get to the AMAs. Oh, before that, sir, wanted to ask something. I know you were a part of Top Chef I think it was the year.
Top Chef Master, the old Buddha logo. Top Chef Masters, yes.
Yeah. So I want to
The
ask.
legends. It's the legends.
Are there like other food shows that you're a fan of, or that you would like maybe recommend, or what do you think of reality food shows? Are you a fan of those?
So, I've judged Iron Chef, Next Iron Chef, Top Chef Masters, Bobby Flay, many different shows. I think shows as we see them on TV are the mindless indulgence that is maiming our human spirit. These reality shows are far from correct. In fact, all the data coming to these production houses is telling them that this mindlessness is what's causing people to be failures in life. They sit as couch potatoes, never cook a thing. They eat popcorn and watch those trashy shows. So it's
talking to you, Silvery.
About inspiring people, educating them. Our reality TV is not real. It's unreal. These are egomaniacal games for egomaniacs. And let it be. There's no good that comes out of them.
I don't think Gordon Ramsay and Suvir Saran will share a holiday together in the near future. Let's
but
go.
Are the skills of the chefs representative of what they can actually cook like in real life? At least that.
So, having judged a lot of these divas and having been one of them, on TV, you don't need those skills. You need to be a janwar. You need to be a criminal. You need to be a lowlife. Because what they're doing on TV, they're stealing from one another. They are cooking garbage that if you really taste in real life, so that it's a different mood. When you're doing TV cooking, I jokingly, when I give cooking demos, I always say, I'm doing a Rachel Ray, which means in 20 minutes, what takes 20 minutes, you do in 1 minute, but you haven't bothered doing it correctly. But you're just making people think you've done it. So it's all smoke and mirrors. There's no there. And I think a new generation of youngsters, the generation that's coming now, the young, we need to teach them very soon that life is not about just smoke and mirrors, that there has to be sanctity, there has to be purpose, there has to be a foundation. If you understand that, then you can do the Top Chef Masters and the Master Chef, because you have the drill that it takes to do that crap. Today's generation, because they've never done the real work, they'll only see this rubbish television. They won't know what the real stuff is all about. So we have to be very guarded in how much actual credit we give to them.
Don't be disappointed, Silvery. You can continue to watch the reality TV shows. He's saying just don't be taken in by it.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Of course.
It's entertainment. So, when Top Chef Masters came out in America, the season where I was, the TV Examiner is the newspaper that reviews all the TV shows that come out. The heading said, Top Chef Masters Season 3, the legend of Suvir Saran is born. So the reviewer said through the entire show, what he loved was my character, because he said Saran understands it's a reality TV show, there's nothing real about it. The others are crying. Oh. He said Saran is not doing the theatrics. He called me equal parts Aristotle and Fabio. He said equally good looking as he is practical and sound in his sage advice. The others were gossiping about each other and looking trashy on television. Why would you do that? You have rich bank accounts, children, family members, successful businesses. Why would you trash one another? At 50, as a master chef, you should not be trashing one another. But these reality TV, they trick you into talking rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet Fabio and Aristotle, one of the great philosophers and one of the great male models. It's really a bridge I can't get to. Really.
It pays to be ethnic. They have to say something
else.
Yeah.
Exotic for them. Yeah, there you go. All right, let's quickly get some AMAs in.
Yes, sure. The first one comes in, it's a very simple question. General Bain asks, Sir, what are the favorite dishes of Cyrus and Mr. Saran? Also, what are the dishes that Cyrus can cook? Cyrus?
Well, my cooking skills involve fingers, dialing, and Zomato. But since they're charging too much on delivery, and they put a rain charge of 18 rupees for some Chinese food hours for that day. Rain charge of 18 rupees. What? I can't fathom that. How does $18 help them in the rain? I don't know what that meant. But I'm not a good cook. I tried when I was in New York and I had to cook. My sister in North Carolina was guiding me on the phone about making just keema. She tried to make me a simple thing which I could preserve in the fridge and keep eating. And it turned out to be really orange because I used too much tomato puree. But I followed everything, from her, but it's still just not a natural cook. So I stuck to Saturday specials in New York. Like you get one McDonald's 2 for 1, and think on Saturday they'd have all these deals. And like a good desi, I hoarded my food and ate the same thing again and again for many days. Yeah, but let's see what the chef's favorite dishes are. That's a tough one.
So my favorite food, ice cream. Ice cream. I love making ice cream. I love eating ice cream. I love bhel puri. I make bhel puri with all kinds of seasonal fruits that are in season. And I love chaat, all kinds of chaat. I love French fries. I love all kinds of egg dishes. And I love all the TV food that you like. Khali pulao.
But bhel puri, come back to bhel puri, chef. No nuts in the bhel puri. Some people put nuts in the bhel puri, which drives me nuts.
So I think...
Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with it. But like you, if it's the classic bhel puri, no nuts. Now did they use that Haldiram mix and their moongfali coming in?
Yes! There should be some law.
Yeah, I agree. But I make bhel puri with nuts, but then I'm making a totally different animal. Just in concept, it's like a bhel puri, but I agree with you. Nuts not necessary.
Although you shouldn't say that on national television ever, that you make bhel puri with nuts, because it could mean all kinds of things. Yeah. Okay. Next.
All right. Next one comes in from Bruce Wayne. This is kind of an add-on to the question you just answered. He says, what is your favorite non-Indian cuisine and what is your favorite restaurant in India to go and eat at?
Oh, that's damn tough. How do you answer that?
I can give a couple of restaurants, maybe.
So my favorite non-Indian cuisine, like my books, there are no favorites. It depends on my mood. I would say Italian, French, Mexican, and Greek would be the cuisines that I would rate which I crave more often than not. A restaurant that I enjoyed going to in Delhi, I want to go to Mask because I'm loving what they're doing in Bombay at Mask. I've enjoyed going to Roo in Delhi, which is doing modern Indian very beautifully. And other than that, I love the Redi Walas, the Thele Walas, the Bhel Puri Walas, the Chaat Walas. There's so many of them that do incredible work. They're the people I really want to support. And during this pandemic, they had no money being made. Because the fancier restaurants have delivery and all of that. The Chaat Walas are nowhere to be seen. So we should all be supporting them as soon as
my local Bhel Wala from my lane has gone back to Banaras and we haven't had it for 6 months now.
Look at that.
And now he's like a modern Bhel Wala. You can phone him and he brings it up in the paper, of course. But I miss that. And
he brings it.
Yeah, his guy delivers it now also. Like, but the road Bhel Wala.
But not since he left for Banaras.
No. I hope he comes back because I don't know what's going to happen to his business. He's doing so well before lockdown in terms of supplying the area. And I've discussed this on the show so many times. My mom and other people's moms or whatever, people at home cannot make the bhel puri like the guy on the road. We got all the ingredients, we got all the chutneys, all ready-made, all manufactured, different brands brought them.
No, but pasina alag hota hai.
Kya alag hota hai?
Pasina alag hota hai. Pasina.
Samjha. That's what they say, but that's just I suppose, you're laughing, so I hope it's not true. Because if it's true, let's not know about it because, it just tastes so much better. And my mom used to get so angry because she wouldn't like me to eat from the road all the time and all these fears and all, especially as we grow older. But I just said, Mom, it just doesn't taste as good. I'm sorry. I don't know what it is.
I think original Bhel Puri was very different from what the street walas are making today. Your moms may be closer to the original, but the street walas have made it even more intensely flavored, more masala, and then nothing can match them. I loved our street wala Bhel Puri. And my mother would also do exactly what your mother is doing, but I do as you do.
What can we do? Just accept defeat sometimes. It's fine. Do one more quickly, Silvery.
Okay, one last one. Yeah, sure. This one comes from Tarun Kaushik. He says, Chef, do you think eating with hands is better than eating with forks and knives or otherwise? Or is there even a difference?
So I'm a person who can't eat with my hands. I'm writing a novel for the last 20 years. The main character, which I guess is me, by the name Kabir, doesn't know how to eat with his hand like I don't. And in the end, the book, Kabir learns how to eat with his hands and life becomes perfectly normal. So I think in a perfectly normal world, the normal, civilized, smart human beings will eat with their hands. Because when you eat with your hands, you have the ability to feel temperature, feel the texture, and then also have the same feeling mirrored in your mouth, in your palate. So it's heightened sense of pleasure that you get. And all studies that people are doing in culinary institutes and places where people are studying how people eat, hands is the best way to eat because it's very tactile. It gives the deeper pleasure, deeper satiety, and idiots like me who were never learned how to eat with our hands need to learn how to do it.
There's a compromise.
So I think there's a big difference, and it's a better way of doing it.
Chef, there's a compromise. You can do both. You can eat with your hands without using your hands. Just get somebody else to feed you. I find that's also great fun. That way your hands don't get dirty, but you still get the tactile feeling, Then
they are getting the tactile feeling. They are getting the tactile feeling, and I'm only getting a
I said it's a compromise. It's not a foolproof formula. It's a compromise. Everybody give and take. Usme, thoda bahut. You have to accept it.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation, Chef. Thank you so much for educating us and taking out time to discuss your life and more. And I hope we get to see you the next time, because New York being a third world country, they took away your electricity. That doesn't happen here.
Fourth world.
Fourth world country. Your dad was right. Yeah, actually it does happen here. But really great having you. Silvery, you want to say something to the chef? Since
thank you so much for the tips for the pizza, sir. Thank you so much. I'll be applying them.
No, thank you for having me.
Very proud of you, Suvir. Keep rocking, and I hope your health comes back to fully normal, and you spread pleasure with your food to all the races of the world, all the United Colors of Benetton.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone. See you. Okay, catch us on any of the podcasting apps. Please, we beg you, we need you. Send us your questions on Twitter, on Cyrus Says In, or you can email us, even if you're not female, on whatcyrussays@gmail.com.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring your very hardcore chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.